Number 13, Texas Tech at Kansas State, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Fox. Can Texas Tech avoid a second trap game in as many games as well? Because last a couple weeks ago, I should say, they suffered their first loss of the year on the road at Arizona State. The Red Raiders responded really nicely this past weekend with a 42-0 shutout win over Oklahoma State. Though it's worth pointing out, Oklahoma State is currently the worst Power 4 team according to PFF's power rankings this year. Texas Tech has an opportunity to prove that it's still a top contender to win the Big 12 this weekend against Kansas State on the road, who's won 3 of its last 4 games after starting the year 1-3. If Texas Tech loses again, though, that might be a death blow to their chances of winning the Big 12 and also making the college football playoff
Yeah,
this year,
for
too.
sure. It's going to be about bouncing back from a loss, right? And a loss maybe they feel like they shouldn't have had against Arizona State, but they fell behind in that game, and they had a hard time creating explosive plays. And now you've got the interesting story at quarterback with Baron Morton coming back from missing the last 2 games. And there's nowhere else to go now with Will Hammond and the torn ACL. If Morton struggles or he gets hurt again, then you're talking about a real struggle at quarterback, and that could be this team's kryptonite. So there is a storyline here: is Morton 100%? Because even if he's not, he's going to have to play. You figure he's probably their only hope at this point at quarterback with Hammond out. This is an interesting game here. I really think this has got some sneaky, close game, I would say, kind of alert here. And Kansas State's been playing better lately, too, really playing with nothing to lose since they're already, 4-4, I believe it is, on the season. They had their early struggles, but they've been playing better lately. Chris Kleiman is keeping that team, playing with pride and trying to get to a bowl game anyway. But Texas Tech has a very interesting situation here. I don't think this is a cakewalk.
Definitely. So you actually have that Kansas State offense against what's been one of the best defenses in the country this year in Texas Tech. What should we know when the Wildcats have the ball in this game?
What I think is interesting is this Kansas State team, especially with some Dylan Edwards injuries, that they've struggled to run the football, and they've had to lean on Avery Johnson and his arm more. And actually, lately, he's been getting it done. And I think a big thing this year is if you look at Avery Johnson against a standard rush when he's not blitzed and he's not sped up in the pocket and having to improvise too much, you look at him against non-blitzes, an 87.6 passing grade. That's a top 15 mark in the country with 10 touchdowns and no interceptions. And you think about Texas Tech and that front four, you could say a pass rush max at the height of their powers. Sorry, I had to do it. David Bailey, Romello Height off the edge, Lee Hunter on the inside. Obviously, I was waiting for the boo from Eli too. But, I think you look at that, and honestly, they're 115th Texas Tech in pass blitz rate. They would be 10 spots lower than that, except for the fact that against Arizona State, the one game they lost, they started blitzing a whole lot more, 25 blitzes in that game. So I think when you look at Avery Johnson versus this 4-man rush, number one, is he going to get the football out in time quickly enough? Because they have not played a pass rush, Kansas State, anywhere near. Yeah. They've only played two other teams in the top 75 of pass rush grade this year. UCF, who's really kind of ballooned up there with some games against bad teams, and Kansas also, which isn't a consistently great pass rush. Avery Johnson hasn't seen a 4-man rush like this, and I'm curious if he can keep up that success throwing the football against those standard rushes. And there are going to be times like Sam Levitt had to for Arizona State that Avery's going to have to improvise and just make some plays and take some chances.
So you mentioned before how dominant the Texas Tech defensive line has been this year. Their offensive line has also been really, really good this year. I'm looking at their offensive line against Kansas State's defensive line in this one. So like I mentioned before, their defensive line for Texas Tech has garnered a lot of the praise this year, and deservingly so. But Texas Tech as a team has been dominant in the trenches this season. 74.2 offensive line grade this year, is 12th in the Power 4. They're 8th in the country in pressure rate allowed, and they're 32nd in the country in run blocking grade this year, too. It's also important this week because, like Dalton mentioned, Baron Morton will be back after missing the last 2 weeks with a re-aggravated knee injury. And he's much better when kept clean versus when pressured. 88.8 grade from a clean pocket, only 56.3 from under pressure. If he does play, and it feels like he will play this week, because I feel like he could have played last week, they said, too, against Oklahoma State. But Joey McGuire said that they could get by against Oklahoma State with Will Hammond, and obviously they did that in that one. But Baron Morton, if he's playing in this one with that knee injury, he probably won't be very mobile. right? So you're going to need that Texas Tech offensive line to continue to dominate. Kansas State is a very good linebacker unit with Austin Romaine, one of the best linebackers in the country, and a really solid secondary too. But the Wildcats are much weaker up front in the defensive line. 65.5 pass rush grade this year, 109th in the country. And in the run game, they're 106th in the country in rushing yards before contact per attempt allowed at about 2 per carry. Of the 8 defensive linemen who have played at least 175 snaps for Kansas State this year, none of them have even earned a 70 PFF grade this year. So I think Texas Tech's offensive line could be in line to dominate this week.
Fun matchup, but it's going to be, can they get to the second level, or can Cameron Dickey and Jacoby Williams continue to make people miss at the second level? Because you mentioned it, Romaine's one of the best run stoppers in the country. Desmond Purnell, very good. Also, Gabe Powers works his way in there. You got some really darn good run defenders at linebacker, so I think you've got a good matchup of, can the offensive line get to the second level, and can the backs make people miss, or can Kansas State limit those big runs to 3, 4, and 5 yards instead of 30, 40, and 50? So really, I think that is something those linebackers in this game, especially against a team, I think in Texas Tech with Morton maybe not being 100%, they're going to want to run the ball with Dickey and Williams on early downs. If Kansas State's linebackers can contain them and put them in third manageable situations, their defense, then you take your chances with Morton and see what he looks like back there in the passing game.
So ultimately, Dalton, will Texas Tech continue to prove why it's still a top contender to win the Big 12 this year, or will Kansas State deliver a major upset?
I think this game, I'm being real with you, Max, this is extremely dangerous because Kansas State's playing better lately, and their ability for Avery Johnson to just make plays back there sometimes in the same way that Sam Leavitt did against this pass rush, and those linebackers, I really think they could make a difference in this game. I think Texas Tech is going to struggle. I have them winning. I think they're going to come through and slide by just enough, but Kansas State's won 3 of their past 4, and the one loss was the game they blew against Baylor. They should have won that game too, and we might look at them even more differently than we did early in the season. I've got Texas Tech 28-24, but there's real danger here, and not to mention, you mentioned the clean and pressured splits. There are also still major home and road splits with Baron Morton, and in his Big 12 games, he hasn't looked great this year. He didn't look great against Utah. He didn't look great against Kansas before he got hurt. Was really good against Houston. We have to give him credit for that, but they just dominated Houston all the way around. But there have been shaky moments this year from Baron Morton, and I'm a little worried about that situation. It would help Tech a lot if they could run the ball well again in this game.
You keep picking these games very close, and I keep picking them by a wider spread. I have Texas Tech winning this one 34-20. I think the defensive line and the offensive line, as always, will dominate for Texas Tech against Kansas State in this one, and I think Texas Tech will win this game and keep their Big 12 title hopes alive with the trenches as they win basically every single game this year. So I think Texas Tech will win more comfortably over Kansas State. 34-20 was my final score.